Ladies and gentlemen, I think it is time to start the next panel at the Lublin Central European Forum. First and foremost, I would like to welcome our wonderful speakers joining us from the Balkans, which allows us to focus a little bit more on the way, not only how we see and interpret the reality from our local Polish perspective, but also what are the concerns that our speakers identify when it comes to the topic of our panel. I would like also to express my gratitude to Agata Domachowska for co-chairing our panel. We will start with a brief introduction to the topic. Afterwards, Agata will introduce our panelists and we will move forward with the discussion. I would like to stress that we are talking about the Western Balkans, and first and foremost, this term we need to use only because it is the most convenient way to describe the countries of the region and their particular relationship with the EU. But otherwise, it is a term that produces more, I think, ambiguities and confusion than a useful point of reference. We are talking about the Western Balkans and its relationship with the EU in the context of already 20 years of promises for membership. We are talking about a very long path towards membership on which numerous obstacles, both from the region and within the EU, had their impact. But a certain event, the Russian full-scale invasion on Ukraine, became another turning point in the relationship between the countries from the Western Balkans and the European Union. Probably the most noticeable thing that has appeared in the political narrative related to this relationship was this so-called geopolitical turn. In other words, the argument raised by the European institutions, and in particular the European Commission, that within the context of this horrible physical aggression conducted by Russia, there is a new geopolitical moment, there is a need for redefinition of the borders of Europe, and within this context there is a new boost in the relations between the countries that are waiting in line to join the European Union and the EU itself. On the other hand, we need to remember that probably the most tangible change is the fact that the waiting room for membership to the EU has been enlarged itself. We have two more countries joining the line, waiting to find their place within the EU. But this extended waiting room did not necessarily produce only enthusiasm, but also raised numerous concerns about the consistency of the European Union logic, consequence and implications for the countries that are already trying to meet the EU conditions and expectations in order to make it to the EU. That pushed us in the Institute of Central Europe towards the idea to try to prepare a report that is actually aiming to check whether the rhetorical narrative about the geopolitical turn has practical consequences in the relations between the European Union and the countries from the Western Balkans. In particular, that the geopolitical turn means something very tangible. It means that if geopolitics is the determining factor for the EU enlargement, that means that the normative demands should be decreased because geopolitical interests prevail. Well, as we can see from the subsequent actions of the European Union, if the geopolitical narrative appeared, and it is part today of the political discourse, the normative requirements were not abandoned. And in that sense, we have a very interesting case, and we silently hope that within this panel today, we will be able to find certain answers, or at least to identify trends that will allow us to better understand whether geopolitics is indeed today the main driver in the relations between the European Union and the candidate states. Agata.
Thank you so much, Spasimir. It's also always a great pleasure to co-chair, host with you this panel. And of course, I believe we are all grateful for having today our distinguished guest from the region. I'm really happy and honored to have you here in Lublin, and I'm waiting for a great discussion which is just ahead of us. And please, and thank you so much for being here today with us. And so let me just introduce to you our panelists, our distinguished guests. So firstly, let me start with Judita Krasniqi. She's close to me. She's a Vice Dean and Professor Assistant at the Faculty of Social Science and Public International Business College, Mitrovica, from Kosovo. She is a PhD in Social Science in Political Science and Public Administration at the University of Warsaw. So, as you can see, a great connection between Kosovo and Poland, and where she graduated with distinction. She holds also 2 MA degrees in Human Rights Democracy from University of Bologna and Sarajevo, and in International Relations from University of Warsaw. Her research fields of interest are related to international human rights, law, traditional societies, women's rights, migration, economic empowerment of women, peace and state building. I think what is also really important to highlight it's the fact that she's also really active within this CSO sector in Kosovo, advocating on equal employment rights for women. And let me just add that she is awarded of several scholarships, and among them it's also she was also nominated for the prize of the Prime Minister of Poland for outstanding dissertation defended in 2021. So, Judita, thank you so much for being here with us. Let's move to Jovana. Marović from Montenegro. She's a former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of European Affairs of the government of Montenegro. She is devoted to the European integration process of Montenegro and the Western Balkans. She also worked as advisor for the EU in the multilateral department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Montenegro. She was also advisor of international relations of European integration in the cabinet of the mayor of Budva municipality, the research coordinator at the Institute Alternative, a special advisor for the Minister of Labour and Social Welfare. And since 2015, she is also she is a member of the Balkans in Europe Policy Advisor Group. And so, Jovana, thank you so much for being here today as well. And let me just add maybe that today is a special day in Montenegro, the Independence Day of the country. So happy Independence Day. And of course, thank you. And and last but not least, Miloš Petrović, research fellow at the Institute of International Politics and Economics and visiting lecturer at the Faculty of Political Science at the University of Belgrade, Serbia. He's focused on his academic work is focused on European studies. His secondary focus is in the contemporary political history and developments in the southeastern Europe, especially in high political challenges, pertaining to inter-ethnic issues and identity. So, Miloš, thank you so much for being here today with us as well. So, without further ado, let's start our discussion.
Indeed, as the title of our panel is about the geopolitical turn, the first question that I would like to ask is, how did the war in Ukraine influence the relations between your countries and the European Union? And I thought, that on one hand we have this political dimension, but it is also interesting to hear how the social attitudes reacted to this new political environment in which we function today. Maybe we can start with Judita and then go one by one.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's really a great pleasure to be here. And also to be able to discuss actually these really important issues, because the issues in the Western Balkans, the Western Balkan countries, there are only little cases that can be separated from one another, particularly in the relation to the EU. So Kosovo, as its unique character and position in the Western Balkans in terms of political, geographical, but also social as well in the relation to the EU, especially since 2008 when Kosovo declared independence, have not changed. So Kosovo has declared openly the society, but also from the political dimension as well, that joining the EU and aligning the politics of the country with the Western principles, either political and those of human rights as well, are the top priority, the top states' national priorities. The relation with the EU during these years, it has had, of course, benefits, but also ups and downs. So one of the main distinguished things in terms of relation with the EU is particularly the role of the EU in facilitating the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, which I would not consider the only element that would characterize these relations, but at the same time, especially in the last years, it has been one of the elements that has received most attention, and particularly since the war in Ukraine has started. So the change in the global geopolitical environment has also impacted the Balkans as well, and also the issues that are ongoing or the issues that are very sensitive. So one of the main elements that I would like to mention is that Kosovo, since the war in Ukraine, of course, Kosovo has supported Ukraine, the society, and also the political elite has supported Ukraine, particularly because of the proximity of the situation as well, in terms of violation of human rights, especially. But at the same time, it has also been one of the first countries to raise the alarm, the potential mirroring reflect of the conflict in the Balkans as well, for different reasons. And also that was one of the aspects that Kosovo has tried to draw attention, particularly towards the European Union, that more attention is requested from the West and from the European Union towards the Balkans, which it seemed that for many years it was going into a straight line, so not a lot of things happening. And of course that the approach of the European Union towards the Balkans, but also towards Kosovo and Serbian relations and the dialogue as well, and the concentration as well to the even particular issues, which are also political but also social too, has changed, especially since the war in Ukraine. So, for example, just one element that it shows the acceleration of the work or the attention of the EU towards Kosovo as well. For example, Kosovo has signed regardless that Kosovo is the last country in terms of the EU integration process compared to other Balkan countries, Kosovo has signed the Stabilization Association Agreement in 2015, but only as of January 2024, Kosovo has been granted the possibility, the society has been granted the possibility to move freely without visa in the Schengen area. Although that over the years, the Council and the Parliament have highlighted that Kosovo had fulfilled all of the criteria that were put for Kosovo, which were double criteria, which were different from other Western Balkans criteria in fulfilling the Stabilization Association Agreement. Still, the implementation of this agreement somehow either was put aside of attention, and also it had caused as well, and continues actually to be reflected in creating so many of social problems even in Kosovo internally. For example, one of the aspects that we are facing now as a country is migration. So prolonging this issue has idealized European Union even more than it should have. Also, since the war in Ukraine started, with a increased intensity of disinformation or information disorder in general, something that not only Kosovo but the Balkans, and also I think to a larger extent it has been a new field that the society and also other social groups as well have been facing, and without knowing actually how to handle this particular element, has caused a lot of misinformation or misdirection in terms of what the EU is and how what's the perspective of the society in the EU. It has also created the situation that politically, especially the political narratives and discussions inside the society have been used and misused by different political parties, whether maybe not trying to change, but trying to win more support when it comes to the position of Kosovo in relation to the EU. So that is also reflected in the change of perspective somehow, or the change of discussion that the new government in Kosovo since 2021 and then later on have had when it comes to partnership and the position of Kosovo towards the European Union and the dialogue as well. But also in terms of proclaiming or claiming as well the support, the political support based on the EU stance or approach towards Kosovo. So particularly different tensions and different elements that have happened, especially since the war in Ukraine, have also influenced in the society to think or rethink their position of Kosovo towards the EU. Nevertheless, still the researchers show that Kosovo remains one of the most pro-European and pro-Western countries. We have about 90–95% of the population who answer in the polls and the questions that the only perspective and the only place where Kosovo has to be in the future is part of the European Union, and then also shows a commitment of the population as well and the society as well to commit towards all of the requirements and the standards that the EU poses towards Kosovo, which at the same time obliges also other political parties and the ones who try to win the social support as well, to align their policies and to align their positions as well in the same spirit with the European Union standards as well.
Thank you, thank you very much, Judita. Miloš.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Institute of Central Europe, also Agata for the introductory remarks, and especially to Spasimir for this great opportunity to to share my views with you today. Regarding your question, I would only shortly I would divide it into the social reaction and the political reaction. Regarding the social reaction towards the aggression, as you're all aware, there has been a widespread Russophilia in the country, which has been instrumentalized, especially since the aggression has started. So the society has been fueled also by this political, I would say, political winds to behave in a certain way. On the other hand, Serbia's official position has been ambivalent. To a certain extent, we have been supporting Ukraine through a partial alignment with some political declarations of the EU, through declarations in front of the United Nations, and through humanitarian aid, and as we have also learned from the State Department reports, apparently through arms deliveries as well. But all of this is beneath the radars, I would say, because the Russophilia is the main political motive currently in Serbia, and especially since the aggression has started. On the other hand, when it comes to the actual decision-making and the European influences in that regard, as you're all aware, as across Europe, there has been increased securitization of all EU policies, which is also reflected on Serbia and the Western Balkans. In the context of Serbia's EU path, I would not say EU accession because I do not believe that the EU accession is taking place. The securitization of the issues which predated the aggression has been taking place. Primarily the normalization process between Belgrade and Pristina, which has assumed even greater dominance, and also the common foreign security policy alignment, which prior to the aggression was not perceived as a major stumbling block on Serbia's EU path, but has meanwhile turned into a major stumbling block. There has been decreased level of alignment of the country with the common foreign security policy, would drop to about 50%. However, apart from these two veto areas, so to speak, I would what is interesting, what interests me the most, and what is the major indicator of our lack of affinity towards European integration is actually the level of democratization. It is the situation in the fundamentals cluster, specifically in the when it comes to the rule of law, judiciary, and fundamental rights. It is also illustrative through the almost identical degree of preparedness to join the European Union since we have began the negotiations 10 years ago, which is an art of sort, I would say, to keep the almost exactly the level of degree, not distancing from the EU, but not approaching it either. So it is an art on its own, I would say, which this government has perfected. Of course, these democratic deficiencies have been also, I would say, revealed in a major manner in the context of the many irregularities during the December elections in Serbia, for which reason Belgrade elections are being repeated in a couple of weeks. The unwillingness to join the European Union is therefore not only reflecting in the context of the lack of alignment with the common foreign security policy, but also in the lack of alignment with the rule of law criteria. And unfortunately, this situation has appeared to be convenient not only for Belgrade, but I'm afraid also for Brussels, which strengthens the stabilitocratic logic in the Balkans.
Thank you, Miloš.
Okay.
Now, yes, Jovana, and now the same question goes also to you.
Yeah. My 12 points goes to. Thank you, Spasimir. Thank you, Agata, for a warm welcome. I'm also very happy to be here today. I'm enjoying city and also the forum and cooperation with the institute. So everything is so far perfect. But the whole discussion, of course, it's not so positive. It's not so different from the other discussions. And Western Balkans is the only part of Europe being behind Europe, not being part of Europe so far. I mean, the European Union, of course, we are part of Europe, but we are not. There are lots of ups and downs in our, let's say, feeling whether we are part of Europe and whether or not. And this whole question about geopolitics, about what is the situation when it comes to the European Union and approach towards the Western Balkans since the war in Ukraine started, we are all sick and tired of this question because we still don't have any proof that the situation is changing and the European Union has different approach towards the Western Balkans. And that's why Montenegro is most probably the best country to discuss this change of attitude or change of approach. But still, when it comes to general approach towards the Western Balkans, I think that the European Union is still like discussing what is the best way forward and what is the best strategy and what is the best framework for cooperation, and still not offering the clear perspective of the membership to the Western Balkans. That's the first thing. The second thing, so far, because I'm really following the whole situation and monitoring the process for 20 years now, and situation was always the same, you know. Lots of strategies, and the European Union is the best, you know, in providing this kind of documents, which are good, but they are first of all not implementing it. That's the first thing. And the second thing, the democracy in the Western Balkans is still the same as it was 20 years ago. So what the European Union is doing if we are not improving our democracy and the rule of law? Then when it comes to the situation after the start of the war in Ukraine, I think that the European Union was all focused, you know, to in rhetorical sense explain that they are more serious about the Western Balkans and the candidate countries, but in practice we were waiting for 1 year for the announcement of the growth plan, and now when the growth plan is approved and when they are presenting in the region, I think that everything is almost the same, because the growth plan is basically umbrella for the all current initiative, the initiative which were there so far for the Western Balkans from the European Commission's level. The second thing is that the growth plan is also still focused on the economy and less on the rule of law. And the third thing is that one of the components of the growth plan is the common regional market, which is basically making integration possible among the Western Balkans, but not between the Western Balkans and the European Union. Of course, there is this first pillar, which is about the integration into some areas of the single European market, but we still don't know how it will work in practice and whether this really important part about incentives and sanctions will actually work in practice, and especially towards those countries which are not implementing the growth plan or not, which are not aligned with the common foreign security policy and the other areas of the acquis or the other policies of the European Union. When it comes to Montenegro, it's really interesting that we still, from the start of the war in Ukraine, we changed 3 governments. Well, we changed like 2 times, but 3 governments were in place during this 2-year period in Montenegro. We were unable to change the government for 30 years, and now we are changing the governments every year. So basically, we have kind of momentum in Montenegro when it comes to the European integration process, because first of all, since we started the negotiations in 2012, we were always front runner of the process, because we were fulfilling the criteria, technical criteria, and all the technical conditions for opening the chapters, but not actually progressing in the rule of law. But still, small country without open bilateral issues, but at the moment we are doing our best to force one with Croatia. But anyway, without bilateral issues, with aligned common foreign security policy, with our foreign policy, with the common foreign security policy of the European Union, with all open negotiating chapters, 33 out of 35. Then we closed 3 of them, and basically Montenegro is the country which is like in the best position to fit this 28th place, which is empty from Brexit. But when the war started, all the messages towards Montenegro were positive because of these reasons. But then we elected the new government in April 2022. And then just few days after all these positive and messages and excitement from the US level, Macron actually announced the European political community. And we were all confused what is that about and why we are not discussing this new chance and window of opportunity which we were discussing with the officials in Brussels. That's the first thing. That government was toppled in the parliament just after a few months, and then all these positive messages turned into negative ones towards that government. And then the current government was elected in November last year, and the whole situation was going there all over again. Same positive messages, same window of opportunity, same. And then what is helping now with this new momentum or the new chance is, of course, the elections for the European Parliament. After so many years, the European Commission is now aware that when they offered candidate status and when they opened negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova, the Western Balkans were left without any positive decision from the European Union's level. That's why they're open negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that's why they are forcing for this interim assessment benchmark report within chapters 23 and 24. Basically, it's just technical report and providing chance for Montenegro to close the chapters, because in accordance with the new methodology, you cannot close even temporarily the chapters if you are not progressing in the rule of law. And all the officials in Montenegro and the European Commission, they are now repeating all over again, IBAR, like this is something really crucial in the European integration process of Montenegro, but basically it's just technical report which will allow us to get into the final phase and stage of the negotiations for membership. So something is happening in Montenegro, but I'm not sure that the European Union, the member states, the European Commission really have a plan for Montenegro after getting this technical report. Because this growth plan is not followed with the political plan. There is no clear roadmaps or dynamics for the Western Balkans, which is really going hand in hand with this growth plan. There is no political vision, even though they are promoting the growth plan with the motto common region, one region, common vision. I think Montenegro cannot be happy with this common vision and common future. I think that we have to fulfill all the criteria in 3-year period. There are lots of obstacles, but I will discuss it later.
Thank you so much. Well, I would like you to talk more and elaborate more on the issue that, in fact, all of you have already touched upon, which is the current role of the EU in the public debates in your countries. To be more specific about the perception of the EU, whether it has changed recently or no, since we can hear that, in fact, the EU is losing its credibility in the region, because it was already mentioned, the integration process takes ages when we think about the region. And if you especially please think about Poland's accession or the accession of the Central European countries in 2004, and how this integration process took, how many years it took, comparing to the Western Balkans. As Jovana has already mentioned, Montenegro has started its negotiation in 2012, Serbia 2 years later, and of course Kosovo has a long way to go, but still. So I'm wondering whether this perception of EU has changed within the society, in this public debate in your country. If so, how much, in which perspective? So please, maybe Judita, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. You mentioned the long way to go. that is one of the main problems in the society. How long is that to go? This has been one of the elements that particularly have been used from political parties, but also the discussions in the society. What does this time have to do with whether Kosovo is fulfilling the elements, the criteria which are set by the EU, or whether the EU integration and it is some sort of a reward or is some sort of a geopolitical momentums. So, for example, I mentioned earlier the issue with Stabilization Association Agreement. So the negotiations between Kosovo and Serbia have been the main, I would say, the main element or the main obstacle, not only in relations between the EU and Kosovo, but also the Kosovo's perspective and approach towards joining also other international organizations. Recently, we have also with the Council of Europe. So in terms of the society, one thing is really important to mention. The society has openly expressed, as I said earlier, the perspective that there is no other alternative for Kosovo rather than joining the EU and being part of the West in terms of aligning the politics and the policies and also the societal, the social approaches. But at the same time, it has also revealed, particularly in terms of the changes that have happened since the war in Ukraine, some sort of an inequality or different positions between Kosovo and Serbia and the negotiation tables. And that has also been pointed out with the change of the government in Kosovo as well. So seeking for a new position of partnership, rather than being or accepting everything like it is without questioning, like Kosovo has always done in terms of fulfilling all of the requests by the European Union and also other Western countries too, when it comes to normalizing the relations, not only with Serbia, but also becoming some sort of a stabilizing factor for the region as well, as a sort of important element and position that Kosovo sought to have in the Balkans. But the recent events have also been some sort of elements for discussion even in the society, pointing this sort of inequality or unequal treatment that somehow the European Union has expressed towards Kosovo. One of them is, for example, the reversible measures that the EU has imposed towards Kosovo when it comes to the situation with elections in the northern municipalities in Kosovo. So, for example, Kosovo is somehow protesting that it has been unjustly been imposed these kind of measures because Serbia somehow is trying to destabilize the internal issues while Kosovo is receiving the measures. And also these are sort of elements, they have a really impact on the society. Nevertheless, I said that so far the society continues, particularly since this big step of visa liberalization has been something that actually has appointed and dismissed governments in Kosovo over the years, because it was always promoted that it is a political will whether this element is going to be implemented or not. So the society has held accountable the governments in Kosovo particularly for implementation of the Stabilization Association Agreement. But at the same time, the political discussions and the positioning of the new government has been particularly trying to initiate or trying to arise this kind of debate whether the European Union is actually being justful and equally treating Kosovo and Serbia in the negotiation table, and whether this sort of element should actually be an obstacle for Kosovo's integration, either progressing in terms of relations with the European Union, but also progressing and becoming part of other international organizations as well. So yes, it is true that the society continues to have this sort of support and this sort of, as a society, we have held this sort of resiliency throughout these years regarding even whether there were ups and downs in terms of EU approach towards Kosovo, because of this openly expressed. I do not want to say that it is wrong, but maybe not having any other alternative is what has brought Kosovo to this position that, okay, we need to, whatever it is coming, we need to accept it, because there is no alternative of Kosovo outside the European Union, and there is no future of Kosovo outside the European Union. And also, since the position and the situation in the Balkans, especially from the Kosovo perspective, has been felt as change, particularly with the new global developments, especially the change in the position of Russia, and particularly the support that Russia and Serbia has expressed openly towards Russia in the last years.
Thank you so much, Judita. Yes, as you mentioned, Kosovo is still, with Albania, the most pro-EU countries in the region. Despite all of these challenges, the resilience, I think it's a great word describing the situation. And as you said, there is no alternative to the pro-European vision and future of the country. So I'm wondering about Serbia right now. Maybe there are more alternatives, different alternatives for Serbia.
Thank you. So moving forward from the most pro-EU to the least pro-EU societies and political actors, it's not serving us really well either. We've been taken, you've probably seen in the media, followed the media, by the recent visit of the Chinese president to Serbia. Serbia was among 3 countries in Europe visited by the president of China. So considering that our foreign policy is fluctuating every couple of months, currently China is our top partner, and the main buzz in the media is the free trade agreement with China, which is supposed to liberate trade entirely within the 5-year course. So this kind of response to the question regarding the presence of EU and the plans about the EU in Serbia, why isn't there a plan to join the EU within 5 years, which would be technically, theoretically at least, possible. But there is a plan for approximating to China, which is on the other side of the planet. To sum it up, for years there's been a paradoxical situation whereby Serbia has been nominally among the frontrunners alongside Montenegro for 10 years now, whereas on the other hand the anti-EU narratives and anti-EU activities have been strengthening. So the perceptions about the EU, which is painted by politicians through the media, as you are probably aware, the media situation in Serbia is the worst in the Western Balkans. The political views and political perceptions largely shape the views of the voters and of the society. So the perception about the EU vary between neutral and negative, depending on what we are talking about. Pretty much everything negative which occurs in the context of the European integration is attributed exclusively to the EU, whereas some rare positive segments like economic cooperation, which is actually developing, is attributed to the government as their main success. So we've been having this a la carte concept of European integration in Serbia, which is problematic for a country which is among the closest, procedurally speaking, to achieving EU membership. The concerning thing is that the European integration aspect has not been present at all during the election cycles in Serbia, which is pretty unusual for a candidate country which is negotiating membership. And this was countered by the visit of the European Commission President in November last year, which was instrumentalized by the government. And it even came, despite the fact that it was interpreted as a silent support to the ongoing government. Also, the statements, which, in my opinion, were tactical by the chief of the European Commission ensued, namely Ms. von der Leyen, complimented the state of the media freedoms in Serbia and the reforms that are taking place in that regard, which came as a sincere shock to everyone who is following the European integration process in Serbia. So we've had this kind of like, in realist terms, this game, whereas the European Union is trying to use its actorness in the Western Balkans to prove itself as a leader, and also through political means. And these means are sometimes contradictory or not beneficial for democracy, which is again leading to the strengthening of autocracy. And to conclude, the EU is perceived currently as an economic partner and not as a desired destination. And this is unofficial. Officially, the EU accession is the goal, but unofficially, it is not the goal.
I think.
So just talk the talk, not walk the walk. Exactly. So thank you so much, Miloš. Yes, so it appears that one strong support for EU accession, it's right now just shrinking in the region, and I guess Serbia is a great example of it. But what about Montenegro right now? Can you, Jovana, perceive any changes?
In terms of public support, it's there. It was always there. Like it is around 80%. Like most precisely, recent from December last year, public opinion poll. The support was 78% of people want to be Montenegro to be part of the European Union. And then the other thing is actually, and as I said, that's public support was always around 70–80%. When I was leading the process, it was really difficult for me to explain why we are not progressing and why we are negotiating for 10, 11, 12 years now, and what is happening in the process, and why like people are. We are a reforming country, we are implementing the reforms, but nothing is changing. So it's really difficult to explain it. And then when I'm stating this data and this info from the recent public opinion poll, people are usually criticizing me because it's obvious that among those people, there are some of them, or at least 20% of them, which are not sharing the European values. Because all the political parties in Montenegro, they are supporting the EU membership as a goal, at least on the paper, in their platforms and in their principles, and not principles, but their statutes, and they are in rhetorical sense supporting the EU membership. But when it comes to some of the values, which are the core of the European Union, they're not supporting them. For example, at the moment, right-wing and pro-Serbian, pro-Russian parties are part of the parliamentary majority, and they are denying genocide in Srebrenica. They are against recognition of Kosovo. They are against LGBT rights also, and the women's rights. So basically, they are standing for all things which are not in the European Union, and their voters, so of course. So conclusion is that most of the people or at least, as I said, 20 or 30% of people, they see the European Union like beneficial just in economic sense, not in terms of values, not about the political union and all the other stuff. And as you know, the European Union is it's not just about economy, and it's not about standards, it's also about values. So you have to fulfill all the criteria, and both political and economic criteria. So in the sense of how we stand at the moment with this whole discussion about the European Union and whether we are approaching, or whether we are getting closer to the European Union, I think that just a few of the parties in the parliamentary majority really know what they have to do and what is the price of such acting, and the rest are pushing them to go completely in different direction. And at the very beginning I said that we are now forcing bilateral issue with Croatia, because you probably know that on Thursday UN member states will vote for a resolution on genocide in Srebrenica, and Montenegro will hopefully be one of the countries which will vote for. And then those parties in the power which are, you know, pro-Serbian, they are of course against this resolution, and they are making pressure on the prime minister to actually, then they initiated the resolution on genocide in Jasenovac, which is in Croatia. So you have this whole confusion how we are supporting the European integration process and how we are acting in completely different manner. So if the good thing is that European integration is always there, high at the agenda. It's always a strategic goal. It's one of the goals which are foreign policy priority, which is in the constitution. And also on the paper, you don't have this kind of doubt between political parties whether we want to be part of the European Union or not. But in practice, there are lots of difficulties. There's lots of fight between political parties. And then at the moment, the issue is that those parties which are fighting over the European values, they are in the government. They are parliamentary majority. So basically, there is confusion in Montenegro at the moment, but public support is there, and we are still at least fulfilling agenda and trying to fulfill benchmarks and criteria within the European integration process. So we are hoping to enter the final stage of the negotiations, but for that final stage, there is a need to have this unique approach and all the same statements from the government and from the political parliamentary majority.
Thank you very much, Jovana. Our discussion so far draws a kind of a very dynamic and I would say diverse picture. You have countries like Kosovo, which wants, but there are, I would say, formal and tangible obstacles that doesn't allow it to come as close as it is possible. You have a country that formally wants, but practically has certain alternative visions about its position and future in the region. And then we have Montenegro, which hopes and expects, but also acknowledges certain serious, I would say, obstacles that appear. And now, if we look from this perspective, of course, initially we thought to reflect about whether the geopolitical momentum will provide the necessary boost for the ultimate accomplishment of the task of joining the European Union. But I would like also to ask you if we can also play a little bit of forecasting in the sense that we can identify the temptation to paint alternative options for the region. They're probably best visible when we contemplate about the Serbia's foreign policy, but if we will miss the geopolitical momentum, what's next for the region? We can start again with Judita.
I think Kosovo is asking for that momentum. I think then the answer is always you have a long way to go. So that is one of the risks, actually. I think this momentum is also now the ball is in the court of the European Union to, first of all, to acknowledge as well that what are the risks of endlessly prolonging the change of the approach towards this willingness and readiness to fulfill the requests from the Kosovo side, but also to recognize and make the changes on the issues which are not in Kosovo's hand or not are entirely in Kosovo's hand. This has also changed particularly with the new government in Kosovo, as it has different views, and also it has expressed a different positioning of the country in terms of internationally as well. So the claim is that, okay, we cannot continue to be as dependent as we are in terms of everything, but we rather need to develop ourselves more independently without accepting everything that we're told to do, because this way we're going to be or become more of eligible partners even for the European Union, although there is not always the case, because there are some unquestionable things that, you know, are related also to the region, but also global issues as well, that Kosovo needed to comply because of this support, the undeniable support that we needed from European Union and also the United States too. So it was depending very much on the support as well. But this momentum, it also needs to be viewed from the negative perspective as well. So if this momentum doesn't come in circumstances like this one, is it going to create a new type of EU fatigue in the society, in the population? So if there is no perspective, or there is no particular time, or no particular deadline, or I don't know, a milestone of reward of Kosovo's constructiveness and readiness to comply with the EU requests anytime soon, then what is the point of being such a constructive partner and in terms with the EU as well? So what is the reward? What is the time when Kosovo will be able to ripe any of the, how to say, fruits of this very long planted relation with the EU? So that particularly has proven this kind of narrative in the last years, and when it comes to negotiations with Serbia. So I mentioned, for example, we've seen particularly the different approach that the EU has expressed towards Serbia when it comes to relations with Kosovo. For example, I mentioned the association of the municipalities agreement, which has become an obstacle for Kosovo's progress, not only with the EU, but also with other international organizations as well. And this association and solving this kind of this kind of crunch, I don't even know how to call it. It is not only the willingness or political willingness from the Kosovo side as well. Kosovo and Serbia have signed 38 agreements, and I can count only a handful of them which have limited progress. While there are claims that from the Kosovo side that there needs to be some sort of a ceiling for these endless negotiations, and is that going to be a mutual recognition? While from Serbia's side, there is always statement that, you know, we will not take this responsibility to declare that we are going to recognize Kosovo at the end. So, and then from the Kosovo side, okay, so we are fulfilling all of these kind of criteria, and we're fulfilling all of these agreements without knowing what the end of these negotiations are going to be. So how long we're going to keep, you know, negotiating for things that we don't know what the result at the end is going to be. At the same time, there is always this discussion as well of whether this association is going to create a dysfunctional state. there's always the case of Bosnia being taken as a parallel example, whether that is going to create a new state inside a state, and whether it is going to divide the Serbian community in Kosovo from integration rather than integrating them. So the position of the European Union in terms of clarifying all of these elements needs to change and needs to be more defined, rather than requesting that there needs to be some sort of a movement, needs to be some sort of a progress in normalizing the relations. Because and at the same time, it is really important that the support for the Western Balkan countries as a whole needs to be expressed by the European Union as well. There is always this dilemma whether the integration of the Western Balkan countries individually is going to be a risk in the future for one of them blocking the other. Whether this temporary solving the issues just for the sake of the European Union later they can reverse, as we have seen during the history that some of the issues can reverse if there are changes in the governments and also political ideologies when it comes to the approach or the position of Western Balkan countries towards one another. So if we have war in Ukraine, rising the alarms of whether that can reopen new conflicts in the Balkans and reopen new sensitive issues in the Balkans, then is this some sort of a parallel of whether the Western Balkans needs to be integrated as a package and rather than an individual states that can later on, if some global issues, global political issues happen in the future that can also change or can risk the stability in the Balkans, will that be reflected in the integration of individual countries if that will be the scenario? So the political momentum and in Kosovo, it is, I think, always. Kosovo has submitted an application for EU integration. I think from the EU side it was taken as a joke, but it was actually some sort of a signal that Kosovo actually, something needs to happen in relation with the EU. And Kosovo, I said, with all this love, expressed love for the EU, we're the last country and we still don't even have the status of candidate. So that can also have a really negative impact on the society. And also there is the question whether this sort of resilience that I mentioned will last forever. I mean, until when is this test for the European loyalty going to be kept ongoing for the Kosovo society?
Thank you. Miloš, how do you see this perspective, especially that Judita's reflection touches upon matters that indeed can be a challenge ahead?
Firstly, I'd just like to circle back to your opening remarks when you mentioned the enlarged waiting room for the enlargement policy, but the overall context is such that this enlarged waiting room does not imply speedy accessions. So this is the overall context that the enlargement policy is still in the crisis mode, and nothing big is going on, at least in the case of the Western Balkans. I even think that there is a comparative difference between the Eastern Partnership countries and the Western Balkans. As someone who has a PhD on the aspect of the Eastern Partnership as a political initiative, I've always found this very interesting, and especially how it appears to me oftentimes that the positions have changed between the Eastern partners and the Western Balkans, especially Serbia, whereas certain segments of integration which are ongoing in Serbia, economic ones, sectoral integration, for instance, integration into transport community, into energy community, and so on. So this flexible integration seems to be taking the front I would say, the front line in Serbia, at least. So it's almost as if Serbia is an Eastern candidate by its own choice, rather than a full-fledged EU candidate negotiating EU membership. So this is one thing. The other thing is that, drawing on something Jovana has mentioned, I think that the EU stars have aligned for Montenegro, and I think that Montenegrin instance would be used to demonstrate that the enlargement policy still exists, even though I do not think that the Montenegrin instance would be relevant for other Western Balkan countries, because Montenegro is specific, especially the context which Jovana mentioned, that it doesn't have any bilateral, interethnic or other disputes, any high political, sort of say, issues. So what I would say is that the EU would use Montenegro as an example to show that the accession strategy exists, while figuring out meanwhile what to do with the rest. And it is no easy task. It was not an easy task even before the aggression. Now it has become even more complicated. So I don't see this changing tomorrow, at least not for the majority. For Montenegro, I personally hope that it would be another story, a success story in that regard, and it would be a symbolical political message from the EU side. Regarding the other question posed by Spasimir regarding the strategic vision or prognosis, where it is easy in the case of Serbia, we see the status quo as the best solution. The current government sees the status quo as the future, which is unsustainable, in my opinion, because the international circumstances are not static. So and nothing is static. So this sort of hedging strategy, if we look at it from the theoretical point of view, used by small countries to secure political, I would say, the prolonged privileges of the political elites, I think it only has a limited duration. But it is hard to predict what will happen. But when I say this, I'm saying this from the perspective of the current political regime, not other ones. I see some positive developments in regard that now we have about 25% of the MPs in our parliament are openly pro-European, pro-Western, which is a significant change comparing to the previous mandate of our parliament. Although the fact that our media are in such a bad shape makes the situation more difficult. And to circle back to the EU, I would say that the EU has been deploying strategic narratives about its geopolitical resolve to accept new members, while the activities have been lacking. So there's a big discrepancy between the narratives and the actual activities. So Montenegrin instance, I think, would be used to show that this discrepancy is smaller than it actually is. And hopefully, and the EU needs to show an unprecedented degree of support to the Western Balkans to meet EU membership criteria, which I don't see happening tomorrow. Of course, the candidates need to do their job regarding the democratic performance, but they need EU aid in that regard, as the previous candidates needed EU aid in that regard as well. And while I do think that the group accession of the Western Balkans would be favorable, the best case scenario, unfortunately, I'm not optimistic in that regard.
Thank you, Miloš. Jovana, as it seems, in a sense, the stout relationship between Montenegro and the EU, in a sense, is the best option at the moment, and there is a lot of hope for the Montenegro experience. So how do we see that in the future?
Let me start with kind of estimation or conclusion or whatever that we are always discussing is there alternative to the European integration process and to the membership in the European Union. But actually the fact is that we are already living that alternative, that we are somewhere between East and West, that we are not a part of the European Union, that they don't want to integrate us, that they are keeping status quo in the Western Balkans, and the people in the Western Balkans are struggling because of this position. And this position is most probably will be, you know, there for some period of time, at least by until 2030. That's the most probable, the most probably the case scenario for the Western Balkans. But when it comes to the possible scenarios and the EU's approach towards the Western Balkans, the first one is, of course, apart from this, to keep the status quo forever. The second one is to integrate Montenegro in 2028 or 2030, and then not to have strategy for the rest of the Western Balkans at all, to keep it with the growth plan. The other one is, of course, to have the growth plan as the everything what is left for the Western Balkans. You know, please integrate among yourself, use some of the benefits of the European single market. Let's integrate in some basic areas, and that's all. For the Western Balkans, that's also the possible scenario. The other, or the fourth one, is to integrate all the countries of the Western Balkans in 2030. And in my opinion, it is possible for the European Union to, in political sense, around the whole, all the countries which are interested in the European values and in this Western orientation. And this was necessary to happen even 2 years ago when the war in Ukraine started, because if there are suggestions for the stage and sector-by-sector integration for the Western Balkans, the European Union should have integrated the whole Western Balkans 2 years ago, and then to without any rights, without veto, without anything in the apart from what we have at the moment, and then to go stage by stage or sector by sector integration when we are in the European Union. In that sense, you have this political impact on the Western Balkans, but the countries of the Western Balkans are not able to block anybody or to have kind of to destabilize the European single market or anything else. And the European Union already has this multi-speed Europe concept. Those countries which want to integrate, they can integrate more. Those who don't want, they are staying at some level, and that's it. And then the final scenario is, of course, that you have kind of road maps for all the countries of the Western Balkans by some date. And it's possible for the European Union, and they're always grouping the countries of the Western Balkans. It's possible to group Albania, North Macedonia, and Montenegro together, and have planned for them, for example, by 2030, and for the rest, most probably without any kind of date. But it's possible. So what is the scenario which will prevail? I don't know, but unfortunately I think that this status quo scenario would be the one. And for Montenegro, my impression that they are now forcing this technical assessment and report in end of June, but that they don't have any kind of strategy or plan for Montenegro after that. So it would be really, really bad for Montenegro to have technical report, which does not mean anything in the general sense and in the sense of integration and speeding up the process, but leaving us with the right-wing government and right-wing parliamentary majority, to be in the same position and same situation for more years. So the European Union has to be vocal when it comes to undemocratic practices in Montenegro, when it comes to this composition of the parliamentary majority. That's the first thing which they have to do. And And the other thing is, of course, to keep this kind of communication monitoring with the government, which they have at the moment after this technical e-button report in June. So in order to become member of the European Union, there should be the same engagement from the both levels, from the European Union's and from Montenegro's level.
So thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've got like 9 minutes, and so it's a high time for you to ask questions, to comment to our discussion. So please free to do it. Who would like to ask questions or to comment?
Thank you very much for a very interesting panel and for a diversity of opinions. You mentioned the democratic progress that needs to be made in several countries, and that the European Union should do more to support that. Do you have anything concrete in mind that what the European Union institutions or European member states can do to support democratic progress and the rule of law, given that, for example, Romania has only recently managed to overcome its mechanism for cooperation in the justice area, and that in terms of democratic regress, we have the case of Hungary that is preoccupying Brussels a lot. So what should the European Union do to support democratic development in other countries?
Maybe another question.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Thank you for a very interesting discussion. I have a very simple question. What is the biggest threat for integration, for the European integration of the Balkan countries, according to your opinion? And just a comment, I think that EU policy is really reacting. We are trying to react to the situation. I think it should be proactive. And I'm really disappointed about how long it takes to be at the European Union. And my critical opinion about this that if 17 years, Macedonia waited 17 years just to start negotiations, and it's still in the process of starting, to be honest. So if your perspective is something in 17 years, this is not a perspective. It's just like gambling with the history. It's like the hazard. And I think we learned that we cannot wait that long, because integration of Europe without the Balkans is unfinished concept. And I really don't like this attitude to the Balkan region that this is something like the other Europe. I mean, come on, this is geographically Europe. Economically, you are integrated almost. You are almost there. So this is political decision. And maybe the only one good thing we see today, this is that the political climate has changed after this. The tragedy of Ukraine, I think we realized that we waited too long for the integration. So I hope I'm like the glass half empty. But I'm coming back to my question, what is the biggest challenge according to you? And thank you very much for coming, and very interesting panel.
Thank you so much, Konrad. Since the clock is clicking and we are running out of time, any other questions, comment? Okay, so let's give the floor to our panelists.
Okay, I'll start with this question about the rule of law and how the European Union can help the rule of law in the Western Balkans. First thing, I think that my PhD was about the democratic deficit in the EU political system. In order to improve democracy and the rule of law in the EU member states, because the European Union is struggling to safeguard democracy even in the EU member states and also in the Western Balkans, they have to go with the same tools, with the same instruments, hand in hand at all levels in order to improve and safeguard democracy. So the first thing is that there is this rule of law mechanism which is implemented in the EU member states, but during this year they are also implementing it in the Western Balkans, in Albania, in North Macedonia, and in Montenegro, but they will keep it without obligatory recommendations. So in order to have this kind of country reacting on something, you have to provide recommendations, and you have to provide monitoring and this follow-up report whether the recommendations are fulfilled or not. That's the first thing. The second thing, within the growth plan, there is kind of conditionality. If you are not fulfilling criteria, you're not getting money. We still don't know how it will work in practice. They still don't have evaluation mechanism. They have criteria, but still we don't know how it will work in practice. And then I think that they have to have this kind of conditionality when it comes to the rule of law criteria, and not just about economy. So that means if Serbia is not aligning its policy with the common foreign and security policy, Serbia will not get money. And that's easy to understand. If you are delivering, you are getting money, because why should the European Union provide money if you are not sharing the values and the rest? And then the third possible way how to improve the rule of law and democracy in the Western Balkans is, of course, to have clear roadmaps for all the Western Balkans, like clear dynamics, clear perspective, and then it's easier to explain to the public why you're not progressing, you're not fulfilling criteria, and these are. And for example, for Montenegro, we were not able to appoint persons at the judiciary, at Supreme State Prosecutor and the other really important positions in the judiciary, because there is a request that 2/3 majority in the parliament has to vote for these persons. And then the new government was able to do that because of the broad coalition, because of the broad consensus on it. So if there is a map, if it's clear that if you are fulfilling this criteria, this is leading you to the European Union, it's easier to get and to have this broad consensus among political parties, because you are approaching and you are progressing towards the European Union. So it's easy to do that if there is really interest and if there is engagement from the European Union's level.
Thank you. Since we don't have much time, I will not repeat what Jovana already said. But regarding Serbia, the instruments for conditioning Serbia are limited, considering that Serbia is uninterested in the European integration as such. So my recommendation would be that the European Union focuses on political cooperation with those partners who are interested in the European integration, or even renegotiate its plans with in case the current government remains, because that would bring more honesty into our mutual relations, because no one knows where they're heading to, as both sides seems to be quite convenient in this game for a while now. And Konrad, sorry, I forgot your question. It is ourselves. The case of Serbia.
Well, thank you very much for the questions. I'd really like to point out that in terms of, like every year, the EU reports and other international reports on the progress of Kosovo in the field of rule of law, they're always like pointing out a lot of deficiencies, a lot of problems, which are hindering the advancement of Kosovo international arena, not only in relation to the EU, but also in other aspects as well. But I would really like to mention that since 1999, Kosovo has had both UNMIK and EULEX present in Kosovo. United Nations Interim Mission in Kosovo, and also the European Rule of Law Mission in Kosovo. Both of them are continuing to be present in Kosovo. Both of them have overlapping mandates. And what's interesting is that since Kosovo has started both the peace building and the state building and the society building process at the same time, all of the laws in Kosovo, like we have remarkable legal infrastructure, but the problem is in implementation. We could discuss a lot about why there is a problem in implementation, and one of them is, yes, it is really beneficial to get the best practices, but we also have to understand that the best practices of the law are sometimes as a result of historical conclusion of a society. Whether there is a remarkable law in France or in Poland is because of social advancements and the momentum that the society in Poland has agreed that this is the best way how we are going to implement this law. Well, taking these laws to a country that has a lot of problems and is going through a lot of social issues, especially after the war, without a clear strategy how these are going to be implemented, just like bringing it to the population, here it is, your laws, implement them now. Like from now on, you're Kosovars, you deal with it. But you're expected to progress on that, and then, because we're coming back for the report, and we will see how much you have progressed. While at the same time, it's like starting from zero, but we were not even at the ground zero. We were very much into minus with a lot of things. My question would be, what are actually the countries doing in the EU rule of law mission in Kosovo, which are the EU money, and this is the largest European Union mission outside the European Union. So they have the mandate to enforce the rule of law, which is also overlapping with the Kosovo laws and the institutions as well, who have always shown the support of all of the initiatives and the requests, for example, of EULEX. But at the same time, we keep receiving the same report that the rule of law is actually really not remarkable, not good. So, yes, it is true that we need to make a lot of progress, but we also have to show the understanding towards the multiple social transformations and social processes that the population in Kosovo is going. Besides that, it is really normal in terms of the society transitions for this period of time that the society needs to change from war-torn country, building back the dignity, building the economy from the scratch, building everything from the scratch, but at the same time you have a train that is going really fast that's called the EU integration, and you need to catch with that. And so this is, I think, a lot of way more pressure on Kosovo that the Kosovo can bear with all of the, the capacities that it has. This is why strengthening more the capacities in Kosovo is really necessary. And understanding approach of the EU and also individual partners as well in the EU, that it is really important to understand particular processes as individual processes, not as a whole. Kosovo is still, together with other nations in the Balkan, societies in the Balkan, facing a lot of traditional elements and nationalistic elements and discussions and debates, which sometimes try to calm down and then they rise up again with different kind of changes, even in the Balkans, but also in Europe and beyond. And then at the same time, there is necessity to embrace all of this legal infrastructure that we have on becoming a remarkable multi-ethnic society, multi-confessional society, which I really can say that I'm very proud of the progress that Kosovo has done based on all of these problems, that the society has faced and continues to face. But of course, it is really way long to go as well, and I am really hoping that this unconditional love and support that we have for the EU, finally we're going to be also considered Europeans, because we're part of the continent of Europe, and at the same time receive this support from the EU. And the biggest threat, to be honest, the biggest threat, I also see the status quo, this very long time of nothing happening, this inertia, this process of not seeing anything going on, some sort of a cloudy weather that it doesn't even rain or snow, or it gets worse, but it don't see any sort of a perspective sunshine, anything changing. And then in these kind of closed environments, just to mention, Kosovo has the youngest population in Europe. In these closed environments, there is always the possibility for a lot of other things to happen, like political ideologies and religious ideologies, and a lot of potential that can go wrong if it is not channelized in a proper way.
Thank you so much. On that note, well, we are coming to the end of our panel. I have to admit that whether we like it or not, we came out to certain conclusions regarding the topic of our panel. Whereas we identify the rhetoric of the geopolitical momentum, our conclusions are not very enthusiastic about the practical consequences of this geopolitical momentum. Apparently, the signal towards the Brussels is that more needs to be done. But what is even more coherent approach from the EU is expected if we are to see this process further developing. I would like to thank you very much for your thoughtful interventions and very, I would say, in-depth answers. On that note, I would like also to invite our the Vice Director of the Institute of Central Europe, Professor Tomasz Stępniewski, because our panel is also the one that closes our event. So in that sense, we also have the privilege of additional small ceremony.
So thank you very much, Spasimir. So ladies and gentlemen, it's time to close our Lublin Central Europe Forum 2024. Yesterday and today we had absorbing discussions during 5 panels and with the leading theme of reshaping Central Europe and building a more sustainable future. On behalf of the Institute of Central Europe, I would like to thank all participants, speakers, audience for being with us. Thank you very much and see you next year in Lublin. Thank you and goodbye.